Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the You and I podcast. This is episode 3. I'll be going through a couple of things I've been reading lately and kind of feeling. I think the first story is Abraham. Second story is in regards to Jacob and Laban, and the third one is something I've been kind of still wrestling with for the past year or so. It's the Leviathan mention that God makes in Job. But anyways, next episode I think I'll be doing the same thing, stuff I've been reading and whatever. And episode 5 I have Justin Lehman on, who's also doing his own podcast now. It's for his senior project, and essentially we're all going to be sitting in a room talking about random stuff. I think this first episode is about conspiracy theories, so that should be fun. I think we're recording that later today. And yeah, that's pretty much everything. Yep, that's everything. All right, perfect. I'm sorry that this episode is late. I recorded this one. And that's a funny story. Here's a little bit of advice if you guys are ever looking into doing anything like this, like recording yourself. Never do it right when you're out of bed. I thought that would be a wise decision, and it really wasn't. And so I got out of bed, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I didn't drink no water, no H2O, no liquids or nothing, no coffee. I just got out of bed, turned my laptop on, put the microphone out, and I sounded so groggy and so awful. And in the moment, I thought it was pretty darn good. It was about 40 minutes long, but then I went back to listen to it again. I was like, I can't present this. So here I am doing a second take. Since then, I've been reading a little bit more on them, and I've gathered my thoughts a little bit better than the first time. So, starting off with Abraham. So this is more of something that came about when I was driving with my friends, and we went for coffee. And what happened was we ended up talking about God and belief and all those things. Oh, my dog's barking. What's out there? Alright, I don't know what that was about, but my dog was barking. He does that sometimes when he's falling asleep and he hears like someone walking or something. He'll just have a spaz. Anyways, so we were driving, went to Tim Hortons talking about God and deep stuff like that. And she told me that she was having a struggle with, what is it? The story of Abraham and his firstborn Isaac. Not the one that from The Handmaid or whatever, but his real, the one conceived of his wife. And she was kind of struggling with the fact that God would even allow this, which I think is reasonable. You know, it's not really fair for the kid, you know, the kid having to go through that. And so I kind of looked into it a bit more, because I think that from face value, it's obviously a story about trust. Yeah, it's a story about trust for both parties, and kind of where I found it to be a little bit more interesting was that I got a couple notes here. Abraham was trusting in God, which is quite obvious, but to go a little bit further, he was trusting that God would keep his promise, because earlier God made a promise to Abraham that he would be the father of, you know, a nation, and that his offspring would be like the stars or the grains of sand on the beach, and, you know, stuff like that. So God had to trust that he would keep his promise. And the thing about the promise is that there's also two parts to it. The first part obviously being, you know, it's like a prophecy saying like this is going to happen. But further on, he explains how it will happen and who will kind of be the forebringer of everything. And God explains that it's going to be in Isaac, that Abraham's son Isaac will be another patriarch of Israel. Obviously Israel wasn't around then, but you know what I mean. Like he's gonna be like Abraham's the dad, but Isaac's gonna be, you know, he's gonna be the one that really sets off the family. And so that's what God is saying. And you know, although God asked Abraham, can you sacrifice your son to me, whatever, Abraham still had the trust, and even prophesying ahead, like right before he's about to sacrifice his son, he even says that God will provide a sacrifice. So still trusting, God's going to keep his word, which is still, a little bit crazy, but imagine waiting around, I think it's around 90 years, but I think it also says Abraham's 100. Anyways, around that area, imagine waiting that long, constantly waking up in the morning telling your wife, God's going to keep his promise, which he does. And eventually your son is born. And all the things you've been wanting and waiting and hoping to do, dreaming about, saying, oh, I'm going to go play ball with my son, or hypothetically speaking, you're going to take him to the park and things like that, or teach him how to tend the flock, stuff like that. You have all these things planned out for the future. But God gives you a reminder. And this is what I was kind of thinking. God gives you a reminder that you need to sacrifice the future for the greater good. Which is kind of cheesy, but that's how Abraham got there. And I'm kind of getting off the map, but Abraham was a man of sacrifice. He left everything to travel, and he served God with everything he had. And maybe when he had his child, he wanted to settle down and raise him and teach him how to do everything, and teach him how to be a little Abraham and whatever. But it was God's plan, not the song. It gets kind of cringy saying God's plan now. Anyways, but it was God's plan to bring Isaac into the world. And maybe this favor that God is asking Abraham is to, kind of nudge Abraham, saying, maybe your time is up, but I still have plans for the future of your generation. But you need to show me that you're willing to give up your future, your plans for your child, your plans for the rest of your life. You still need to give that up to me. And if you're willing to give that up to me, I'll take care of the rest. He needs to show that, if you're going to be the father of a nation, then you need to be able to give up at least one child. And that's a crazy thing. And if you wanted to relate that today, maybe you have these aspirations and these goals for your life, and they're pretty out there. But maybe God's called you to something. He's called you to preach or something like that. And the example we always get, and I always hear, is like, before you can preach, you gotta mop the floors, or, change the garbage bags, or wash the windows. It's small increments. It's small increments and small steps in order to reach something greater. It's not really just gonna come to you. Before you can get there, you need to put in the work. I think that sometimes we feel like we've been called, we feel or we know that we've been called to do something for God, or we've been given an opportunity for the future. But we often forget that because there's an opportunity, or we know that something's going to happen, doesn't mean we can be comfortable. It doesn't mean we can just sit around or not, do anything towards working towards that. we need to always be moving in that direction. Even if we don't, like, if we have a vague picture and that's it, it should be our goal to keep on working. Sorry if I'm stumbling over my words. Throat's a little dry. Go drink some water. All right, thanks. But yeah, I think that's what this story is about. God made a promise to Abraham. And Abraham had to trust that he would still take care of things, even when little bumps on the road came up like this. That he would keep his word, and God wanted to see if Abraham could really be a father of a nation. But it's the father of God's nation. I don't know where I'm going with that one. Maybe I'll develop that one later. Anyways, next story I was reading was about Laban and Jacob. And this one's a bit more personal. And I'll share that with you guys, might as well. But for the past little while, maybe the past year, not so much now. Especially not now. There's been a big change, but I used to be a super bitter person. First I was really the opposite, and then I became a bitter person. I was more open, wanted to help others, but eventually, people do things and whatever. People mess you over. And that happens, and you mess people over. We all play a part in each other's demise at one point or another, and that's what we do. And we all make mistakes. Cheesy, corny stuff like that. But we all do make mistakes, and it's a matter of how you deal with them. And at that time, I was not dealing with them well. I'd spend time in my room when I should be asleep, kind of thinking in my head, maybe I should have said this, maybe I should have said that, and before you know it, an hour or two passed by. And yeah, stuff like that, where I'd think over the decisions that I made and why other people decided to act in a certain way towards me and whatever. And that's the worst, thinking like, well, why does this person not like me or whatever, why doesn't anyone or everyone like me, whatever. Like, that's a silly thing to think. If you got at least one friend or two friends or whatever, that's it. You don't need no more. I think that especially in a time where Instagram is relevant, we assume that we need to have like thousands of friends and thousands of people. No. David only had what's his name? Oh my gosh, I thought about this a second ago. Nathan. Yeah, David had Nathan, Adam had Eve. Whatever. You only need one good friend. One or two good friends, your youth pastor, stuff like that. Don't worry too much. Life's too short to worry about that stuff. Unless you're causing trouble, then God won't forgive you, you know what I mean? God won't forgive you if you're causing trouble and you don't want to make it right, and vice versa. Anyways, off this silly tangent. The story of Jacob and Laban kind of did hit me hard, because I was a very bitter person, and essentially what happens is that Jacob is a scumbag. He starts out as a scumbag, taking his brother's birthright for a bowl of broth or something like that, a bowl of soup. Runs off into the country, and eventually he arrives at this place and finds this attractive girl and whatever, and she's got a sister who isn't that attractive, and that's kind of the joke. And her father, Laban, is also a scumbag, and so maybe this is God being comedic by letting these two meet, getting a taste of their own medicine. But in this, while Jacob is working, while Jacob is in this new part of his life, he wants to marry the girl in which her name is Rachel. Rachel's super attractive and whatever, and eventually he does end up working for 7 years, and Laban's like, okay, you can work 7 years for me and then you can marry Rachel. And so Laban pulls a fast one, and when no one's looking, he changes out the daughters and something like that, and Jacob Jacob ends up with Leah. And Leah isn't that, she's not the top of the town. She's not the top of the hierarchy, you know what I mean? But that's what happens, and Jacob feels mistreated and screwed over and whatever. And so he's like, Laban, I'll work another 7 years for you. And so Jacob does that. He works another 7 years, and after Laban's like, okay, you can finally marry Rachel. And so he marries Rachel, and, they have a bunch of kids, all of them, and the stuff that they did in the Old Testament, whatever. From there, this is kind of the part of the story where I super related with. I love it when you read a story in the Bible or read a story anywhere, and it's the solution to the to the dilemma that you're in. And so this is the solution. God tells Jacob to head back to where he came from, go see his brother, and make things right and whatever. And so he packs up all his things, all his grandkids, all Laban's grandkids, all of his children, and all of the livestock that he's earned, and everything that he deserved in that place. And he leaves while Laban is far off in a land with one of his servants. I think they're tending sheep or at a farm or something. I can't really remember off the top of my head that well. But God talks to Laban because Laban eventually finds out, and Laban starts running and heading towards Jacob while they're heading back, and he wants to kill him. He's that mad. And God stops him halfway, and he's like, you gotta relax, man. You gotta relax, Laban. Be careful about what you say over there, because it could end badly for both of you. And so Jacob and Laban finally meet up, and what happens is that Laban goes on a massive tangent towards Jacob, saying he stole everything from him, he took everything that he ever had, stuff like. He's being super dramatic. But maybe I would have answered the same way because he is taking some sheep and grandchildren. But anyways, Jacob answers saying that he's always been good to him, which is true. He worked hard, even though Laban changed his wages, even though, he gave him the wrong daughter, which is still kind of funny, but he gave him the wrong daughter, the ugly one, and all these things. He's treated him misfairly, and Jacob is the one that had to deal with problems, even if they weren't his fault. And that's kind of, you can see kind of a Christ thing there. If you put yourself in Laban's position where you feel like life is just unfair, and although you've been somewhat of a manipulator and you for once don't get your way and things kind of turn on you, God's still there. He's still fair. Stuff like that. That was one point. He's always good regardless of which way you decide to act. He's always good. He's always fair and always truthful. That's something that my boss told me. He always tells me, God is always fair, and it's the last person I thought I'd hear it from, but he told me it, and I say it more often than never now. And so, Laban kind of fesses up, and they decide to gather stones together and make a monument or covenant, something like that, made out of rocks. And Laban calls it something in Aramaic. I can't really remember, and I'm not really going to try to read it because it's super long. And Jabe calls it something in Hebrew. But eventually they give it a name together, and they call it Mizpeh, which means watchtower. And so the meaning behind that is that when, they go their separate ways, and they've kind of made up that God will watch each one of them. And so there are certain interpretations or certain commentaries I've read where this is kind of, Laban's still kind of salty, saying, just go on, do your own thing, and get out of my sight kind of thing. But although, let's say it is that way. Let's say it is, all the bitterness is still there. At least they did something about it. They talked about it. They even made somewhat of a sacrifice, something to show that they at least made an effort to solve their problems, which showed that they were serious. When people make sacrifices in the Bible, there's blood, and there's, when people made monuments, there's rocks, and there's probably blisters and whatever. There's evidence to show that they were serious about it, which is a whole other topic. But I think that one thing that we can take from the interaction between these two people is that although maybe everything wasn't resolved, which I don't think it can be 100% resolved, at least they wished the best for each other. And at least they wished God's blessing upon each other. It maybe, even after the whole thing was done, they still had negative thoughts towards each other. At least they made an effort, and maybe this isn't the most optimal way to take care of any type of beef or hatred towards someone, but it's an act of love, at least, to wish something greater for someone, for another human being. It's a sign of decency. Imagine if they didn't do anything. There'd still be a hatred brewing, and maybe eventually Laban would have killed Jacob, and something awful could have sprouted out of that, and a snowball of evil could have taken place or something. Things could have gotten worse. And this story really helped me, because before that it would just be me waking up in the morning, and I'd be like, in my head, okay, I have to forgive this person. I have to forgive this person, because there's nothing worse than having to deal with unforgiveness and bitterness. It's like a disease. It's like a sickness, especially when you're aware of it, and if you don't constantly think about, okay, I have to forgive this person, or else you'll grow sick. You have to forgive the person. But when I read the story, it's really helped, because instead of having to force yourself into being into the day saying, okay, this person did this to me, I'm just constantly trying to get over it, whatever. Instead, it changed my mindset from that to, I hope that they are living a good life right now. I hope that they're not suffering or having to deal with any issues. Or if they are, I hope that the greatest outcome that can possibly be happening is happening to them right now. Because if I was doing the opposite, it's I'm not saying that prayers work in the opposite way, in which we can wish the worst for someone so that we can wish the worst for someone. I'm not saying that, but we do that, and that although maybe a meteor may not strike them, we're just fueling this ball of negativity in our hearts that doesn't do us any good. We end up facing more pain than that person that we're wishing pain upon. And take it from me, guys, it's not a good place to be. I was watching this video, and oh my gosh, a crazy video of a Muslim man who was in the court for because a murderer, this man had killed the Muslim man's son, and in front of everyone there's cameras there, and thank God there was cameras there. The Muslim man proceeds to forgive the murderer in front of everyone, in front of his family, saying that, just saying that he doesn't blame him, but he blames the devil for putting evil in his heart and things like that, and that society will suffer because there will be one less person to fulfill his potential, something like that, in society. Something crazy like that. Just a crazy statement of forgiveness towards this man, and it's just so wild because what am I bickering about, What are we all bickering about? No one's died, and I mean, it's no excuse for us to get pushed around. That's a separate thing, but forgive and wish the best and whatnot. Anyways, going on to the third story is I'm not sure, maybe I'll save this for next time. No, I'll try to get it over with right now. Okay. So, in the story of Job, this is one I'm kind of still kind of wrestling with. So whatever I say, kind of, in a way, take it with a grain of salt. So there's mention of a Leviathan in Job 41, and I heard about this from a lecture that Jordan Peterson was doing. He mentions it in one of his Bible lectures, and he makes a reference to what he called a Mesopotamian story, but I found through my research that it is closer to Babylon, a Babylonian story. And maybe they're, I'm no expert in that stuff, so maybe they're the same thing. I don't know. Anyways, he mentions a story about a Leviathan, and part of this Babylonian story about how there is a group of gods, and the story is called the Enuma Elish, by the way. And there's a group of gods, and one god rises up to be the most evil god. His name is Tiamat, and he's like this Leviathan, serpent-looking thing, with multiple heads. And it's kind of the same serpent you'd see in Greek mythology in that Hercules movie or whatever, where you cut off one head, another one grows. And so this thing starts raining terror in that god world or whatever. And eventually one hero rises up who's very orderly and knows everything, whatever. And he tells everyone to elect him as kind of the leader, or no one's going to get saved or whatever. So he becomes the leader, and he leads everyone, and he kills Tiamat, who is the evil Leviathan god, and he cuts off the heads of the Leviathan and creates the world from its pieces. So, that's kind of a lot of information to take in. But in Psalms, he made this reference, and this is what kind of just threw me on this trip, was that David mentions kind of the same idea where God cuts off the heads of the Leviathan and feeds the people and supplies the people with what they need. It's kind of an interesting thing. So anyways, there's a big debate over whether the Leviathan was an actual creature or whether it was a mythological creature. And for me, I personally like either way, it doesn't really matter. But you can kind of look at it. You can look at it from in regards to meaning, like a meaning in the story. You can look at it the same way. God is asking Job if he is able to take down the Leviathan, which, if it was a real animal, like a real dinosaur, it was causing trouble. It was something that no man could overtake. whatever, are you able to handle it? Which the obvious question would be no. There are certain things that we need God to take care of. But on the other hand, when I looked at the word Leviathan in the Greek, it said that it was a symbol of Babylon, and so, which it just happened to be the most evil god in Babylon. And the symbol of evil, when it grows, like, the way that it was explained was that the Leviathan, since it has more heads, and since it has like a bunch of heads, and you cut one off and another one grows, it's like evil or trouble. When you finally take care of one issue that you're having, another one grows, another one pops up. And what's kind of interesting, this is completely off topic, but Satan is referenced as the dragon, the Leviathan, and the serpent. But he began as a serpent in Eden, and eventually he's compared as a dragon or the Leviathan in Revelation, which you could kind of compare to an issue you leave in your closet, and you leave to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow and grow, and eventually something you just can't handle. You know, starting out as a small snake, eventually becoming a massive Leviathan that you can't really deal with. Like, you could compare it to addiction or something like that. But you do need God, which is the moral of the whole story. God, like, there are certain things that you just need to trust God with and leave it at that. Obviously, you need to play your part, and you need to play your role, because you need faith, and you need to trust God, and do your part and pray and give your time and whatever. You know, that's your part, and God will take care of the rest. And so that's kind of what that story is about, whereas God is asking the question, are you able to handle this? Which is, the answer is no. But what if you thought you were able to? Which is kind of where I preached on this a while ago. I preached on the message of the Leviathan a while ago, and it was called Gods, I believe. It was 100% called Gods. And so it was kind of about what happens when we don't trust God right there and then. And usually what happens is that we run to social media. My example was social media. I'm not saying that we do this all the time, but it is something that I've seen quite frequently, where if people were having issues, or people were having troubles, or they were sick or something, like, they'd post like, oh, I'm in the hospital, or whatever, or I'm leaving the hospital, or I'm so sick, whatever. And things like that. Or if they were having troubles with their girlfriend or something like that, they'd post nothing lasts forever, some silly stuff like that. No offense. Anyways, but we'd run to social media for our problems and for, advice from randoms we've never met or something like that. And eventually what happens is that God is put in the background, and we as ourselves, we become God. And the worship that we get from people are this small small likes that we get, and small bursts of self-worth, which only lasts for a little bit, as long as your post is up. Like, it never solves the problem. It just makes us feel good, which has nothing to do with the problem, and has only to do with us, which probably is the problem. Which is why we need to trust God with the problem. God is the solution to whatever the problem may be. So it's kind of silly when we go out and look for our own solution. Especially if the issue is something so large that we don't even know how to handle it. Especially if we try to handle it through social media. So that's kind of where that was at. And yeah, I think that was also during a break where me and my boy Justin, we weren't on social media for a couple months. That was crazy. Because it's like you didn't care anymore about what people thought and stuff like that. And I mean, there was a little bit of anxiousness because you felt like you were missing out. But aside from that, you kind of realize that you aren't missing out because you're living in the moment, kind of thing. Some cheesy stuff like that. Yeah, that's kind of been all that I've been reading. Like, just a thought right now is that most of these stories are about trusting God with whatever you're dealing with, or whatever you believe the future holds. Trust God with that. Because what do you know, you know? What do we know? Trust God with the person that you're having issues with. Hope that God touches them instead of hoping that they're left to the devil's demise. Because that'd be kind of silly. And then trust God with your issues, especially if they're greater than you. Don't run to social media. That's silly. That's silly. Thanks guys for listening if you made it this far. Just a reminder, Justin Lehman. I hopefully will do that in 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks. I'll try to do another one next week. If you guys have been reading anything that you want me to look over, I'll be sure to look. Just throw a DM. And yeah, gonna do a podcast tonight. I hope I'm gonna send a message out, and when it's out, I'll try to link it and I'll share it as well. I think we're talking about conspiracy theories. And anything else? No? Perfect. Share, subscribe. Hopefully I can get video done soon. Videos, and I can record video and audio. Yeah. All right. Thanks. See you guys later. Bye-bye.